Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on our website, leave us a Google review, and if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation below. That email address for discussion topics, hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. There's a podcast version of the show also available from our website every Monday and from all main podcast platforms. Just search Property Matters TV. Let's take a look at the week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. And welcome to Property Matters.
Let's take a look at our first story, which is around a fifth of UK tenants are spending over half of their take-home salary on rent. That is according to a tenant and landlord service provider called Canopy. The company's index analyses data from more than 60,000 individual renters, measuring average take-home salary of employed tenants against their share of rental costs to create a rent-to-income ratio, revealing what percentage of the salary is spent on rent. Typically around 40% of take-home salary is considered a very outer limit of affordability. The latest Canopy report shows that the average renter is actually spending 36% of net take-home salary on rental payments, yet in several areas of the country, including every single London borough, bar one, tenants are spending in excess of 40%. I've got to be honest, I thought it was going to be a lot higher than 36% and even 40% in London. What's your view, Joe?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the actual amount is much, much higher on the ground when you think about the salaries that may come into a household, especially if it's a single salary. It's way higher, and you can't. And some of the rents that they have quoted, they haven't probably allowed for the real rents that are happening actually. And it goes back to that supply and demand thing. The supply is now become very limited in rental property, and the demand is very high. So people are having to pay way more than they probably originally planned to. And that means that, they are going to be contributing a lot more of their salary. Now, obviously, that's where it needs two people. You could almost say one person's salary pays for your living, including the rent and the bills and the utilities and so forth, and the other one might give you a living standard of some sort. But I mean, God help you if those two then parted company, then you're stuck with one, and all you're going to do is pay the rent and the electric and stay indoors forever.
I'm guessing that these figures must be a shared rent, I would assume, because to me it just doesn't stack up. Those in the northeast pay the lowest rents of the country at just £573 per month. I think we all need to move up there, don't you think? This equates to 33.7% of the average take-home salary, which is around 2% less than the national average. While rents in the northeast are at the cheapest, a higher average salary in Northern Ireland means that they have the most affordable rent in the UK, with the average tenant here spending less than a third, 32.9% of their salary on rental payments. So Northern Ireland, the place to be, it seems.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Northern Ireland. I might have to take a visit over there and see what's going on. But it seems to be a happening place for a number of reasons. But yeah, I think that the numbers that they're talking about are definitely wrong. But I think it's closer to, maybe 45, 50% of somebody's salary that they're actually parting with towards rent alone. Considering that most areas now around the southeast, a one-bedroom apartment is probably circa £1,200 a month. Plus utilities and other costs. So you have to allow yourself a £1,500 a month budget just to stand still.
Yeah, they say in London tenants, and here's the clue really, tenants pay an average of £1,183 on their personal share of the rent. That suggests it is taking it per person, typically equating to almost half, 44.5% of the average take-home payslip. This is nearly 12% more than Northern Ireland and around 8% more than the national average. Tenants in London, 44.5%, the South East is 44.1%, and the Southwest, 41%, are paying the highest share of their salary on rent versus the national average. So here is a quick table. So in London, the average take-home salary is £35,915. The average rent per person, 1,183, 44.5. The average salary in the southeast is 26,380, which is considerably lower than London. I'm surprised at the differential there. 24,000 in southwest, but the average share of the rent is £756, which is 41%. If we carry on going down, it's all pretty much the same until we get. In fact, as we said, the cheapest is in the northeast. 22,378 is the lowest take-home salary in the UK. I beg your pardon, Wales, £21,614 is the lowest take-home salary with a rent of £638.42, which is 38%. But the northeast remains, although they don't have the lowest salary, it's definitely the cheapest to rent there because it's only 33.7% of your salary. Alongside Northern Ireland there, so interesting variations in terms of the rent, and the UK cities. If you look at that, Bournemouth, the most expensive place to rent, 22,865 is the average take-home salary. You'll be paying £798 in average monthly rent, which is 47.2%. Prime place, I suppose, on the south coast there, Joe, for Bournemouth. But looking at those, they're all desirable locations, aren't they? Bournemouth, Oxford, Brighton, London and Bath.
Yes. I did a quick calculation, Paul, going back on your previous graph there, showing that a London income of £35,000 a year is basically over a 12-month period is just under £3,000 a month gross. So you take away obviously whatever their taxation would be. So let's assume for argument's sake that you take £700 odd out. It's going to be £2,200 take home, and then you've got £1,200 worth of rent.
Yeah.
So it's closer to 50% of their monthly income that they're actually parting with rent, as opposed to whatever figures that they've come up with in reality, because the disparity there is that you're showing a £35,000 income and only a £1,000 outgoing, but you don't show that the rest, that's on a monthly basis. If that was divided over a 12-month period, then you'll find that those numbers are changing a lot. But sorry, I just couldn't believe that they were saying, it was such a low amount. I think it's much higher.
Yeah, if you go into the London boroughs, Enfield, it's 53%, Barnet, 53%, Haringey, 51%. Most tenants have less than half of their income left over for bills and general spending once rent has gone out of their bank accounts. Newham is the most affordable area in London, with an average rent spending of 39.1% of their salary on rental payments, which is still around 3.5% more than the national average. Despite being home to some particularly expensive boroughs, London is not actually the most unaffordable city in the country. In fact, it came out fourth. As we said, London takes home £35,000 versus £27,000, yet a higher average monthly rent cost of 1.183 means that those in the capital spend 44.5% of their take-home salary on rent as average, whereas Bournemouth it's 47, Oxford 46, and Brighton 46 as well. Bath at nearly 44% also makes up the top 5 list of the most unaffordable cities for renters, with Edinburgh the only city outside southern England to feature in the top 10. When you move away from major cities and look at the areas, Halifax is the most affordable area to rent in. And you can see on the screen, and for the benefit of those listening, £23,039 is your average salary, but your rent is only £564, which gives you a ratio of 31.2%. And you look at those other places where it's a good place to rent: Darlington, Barnsley, Dumfries, Belfast, Stoke-on-Trent, Sunderland, Carlisle, Crewe and Shrewsbury. Not being rude to those places, but they're distinctly different to Oxford, Brighton, London and Bath.
Absolutely. That's it's all relative, isn't it, to where the area, and as I said, is the main thing that you have to bear in mind is it's nice to know that they are cheaper and you can live there, accommodate. But if the communication is no good, the train service to get them, and then there's the cost of the train service. It's not just the train service; it's the cost of the annual monthly ticket for people to travel. That's all got to be accounted for. So it's good to say you can live somewhere for £500 a month, but it might cost you another £500 a month to travel. So that's why some people say, well, I might as well go and live in London because at least I'm not having to have that travel time added in order to get to the work. So communication, work, and all those other things are very important in the decision of where you're going to live.
The report says that the rental market, as a result, with all these disparities between different areas, it remains in a fragile state, they say. While it's encouraging to see efforts being made to relieve pressures on tenants, any regulatory changes could inadvertently push landlords out of the market, shrinking the supply of properties. Most landlords are already adhering to the spirit of the Renters Reform Bill, or the Renters' Rights Bill, as it's now going to be called, but the full consequences remain uncertain. Government must tread carefully so as not to disincentivise landlords further, which could ultimately lead to additional rental price pressure, deepening the affordability crisis. And I guess you're on board with that statement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and this renters' right thing bill is really absolutely a dog's dinner. That is going to cause a lot of people a lot of heartache. More so the landlords who supply the much required property that the local council and the government needs to have. So long may they continue to build these big corporations, Paul. That's what I say, and quick supply of these 15,000, sorry, 1.5 million homes that they said that they were going to build over the next 4 years.
Let's
Get
move on
digging.
to Let's move on to our second story, which is residential property has been the long been the investment of choice for many Britons. But with many landlords who developed their properties and portfolios in the early days of the buy-to-let market, nearly 30 years ago now in retirement or nearly retirement age, a new breed of landlord will be required to step up and provide the rental homes of the future. So Paragon Bank has surveyed 500 landlords in between 1 and 3 properties who have expressed a desire to grow their portfolios to understand what this future cohort looks like and what is driving their property ambitions. So they found that the average age of aspirational portfolio landlords is 37.8, which is a real surprise to me. The highest proportion of landlords were aged between 25 and 34, which is 35%, followed by 35 to 44-year-olds, which are 31%. 3/4 were already higher rate taxpayers and 77% were in full-time employment. Over 4 in 10 live in London or the South East, with 12% located in the North West. 51% were already involved in property-related sector or in a role associated with property. And the report found that family and friends with an existing property business was a key driver for 43% of next-generation portfolio landlords, which initially became a landlord following a desire to develop long-term rental income. That's got to be the only reason why the next generation of landlords seem to be so young. I mean, it's a surprise to find 35% of them 25 to 34. They must have got involved in a family business, surely.
Well, it's the only way they could have got involved. It's where 30 years of investment from their parents. Some they've actually had to get rid of because they probably have outlived their life. Either they need doing up or got short leases or just are not in a desirable location where they can get the best rent. And that's been tidied up to a portfolio that has probably been passed on to the next generation. And they are the ones that are starting out. But yes, I mean, obviously they've got to start somewhere and they've got to start with a new slate. And the new slate means that the borrowing cost is much, much higher than it was over the last 10 years, perhaps, 14 years, ever since the interest rate went down after the financial crisis. That was a lot easier to make money on, but to make money on the borrowing levels now is near on an impossible task. So I think, yes, the first set of generation that's part of that are the ones that have been brought in and perhaps inherited some portfolio.
I saw a story this week, Joe, and you may well have seen it in the press as well, about the fact that solicitors have been inundated with people looking to pass on portfolios or individual properties to family members, presumably to try and avoid some of these much talked about increases that are going to happen potentially with CGT and the like in the budget at the end of October. Did you see the story and what's your thoughts?
Yes, I've seen the story, Paul, and the truth is that there is such a variety of that story version. A lot of people have been asking about how to mitigate their tax liabilities and what the solutions are going to be, and that could be through trusts, that could be through the 7-year rule of passing it over. And maybe even transferring their asset into limited companies, which is probably why the younger generation are coming into the rental market, because they have a already an established portfolio that just needs to be nurtured. And in that portfolio pool, some of the people have actually got rid of what they might thought were not actually producing the best results. It might be in a bad area, it might be something that's got a low lease, it might be something that they're not just doesn't command the kind of rent that they may have got at one time. So they would have got rid of those and then just tidied the portfolio up and put those into perhaps a limited company or a trust. And I have to say that I spoke to somebody recently about trust, and the trust is also very varying trusts that are created. You have to remember that when you do put your property or your asset into a trust, you're actually not in charge of the trust itself. It's the trustees that you appoint that become in charge of it. So, each one should really think very seriously about the kind of things that the vehicles that are available for you to do going forward.
67% chose property as the asset for them because it's a tangible asset. 60% are investing in property because the long-term demand for rental homes will continue. 53% view it as a long-term investment to supplement a pension, and 38% finance their first rental property via a buy-to-let mortgage. But interestingly, 36% purchased outright on their first property. One wonders where the finances came from for that.
Well, the finances from the bank of mum and dad naturally is not something that is just fall from the sky unless they won the lottery or something like that. But the reality is that it is the most tangible asset that you'll ever buy. I've always advocated that you should always buy a property primarily because even if it's lying empty, you can touch it, feel it, and see, and say, well, at least I've got something that is actually tangible. So I think a lot of people buy it for that side. Of course, the rental market will continue to rise. It's just that it's having a very different and varying version now of what used to be to what is going to be, and you've got to be ready for all the troubles that may come through, depending on the type of policies that get passed through the government. So I think property will always be a secure way forward. And it's just a case of whether it sort of fits your needs and desires. Another thing is property has also been the source for many other avenues. And so, yes, there's a lot of people that are in the property business, be it through letting, be it through maintenance, be it through, its growth, its extensions, its development, building. I mean, it just is ongoing what actually comes out of it. So a lot of people are involved in property in its different formats.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it as a business case, it really does stack up. You've got an asset that's going to appreciate in value, albeit recently in not such high amounts, but you've also got a ready and waiting market to sell to, in the sense that you're going to people need rental homes. And you get the double whammy of a recurring income, but you've also got an appreciating asset. So from a business point of view, it really does stack up. But do you think there's an element of the reason that a lot of landlords are getting out is because they're just not making enough out of it anymore? Are they getting too greedy, do you think?
Well, no, they're not getting greedy. They've been made to get greedy because, unfortunately, it is where the market has become. Interest rates have gone high, cost of living's gone high. So therefore, if they borrowed money, they got to pay more money, and the only way that's going, it's a rolling on forward rolling spiral, isn't it? I mean, it's just someone's got to pay for it. It's going to have to be the end user. So I don't think they get necessarily being greedy. I've known of landlords who have actually paid from their own pocket because they don't want to upset the people that they're in there because they know they can hardly afford what they've got. So there is a sort of a philanthropy part of it that people don't even see. That when landlords are saying, well, actually, you know what, I've got an asset there, I bought it for X, I'm okay with that. So what I'll do is I'll just not up the rent. On the other hand, there are landlords who have just bought recently with high rates, and are saying, I've got to have that money to cover my costs. So it's horses for courses.
They're seeing that there's a large jump in the proportion of people who are looking at targeting terraced housing, the staple, of course, of the rental market. That's risen from 26% at the moment to 37% in the future. So another 11% of landlords are looking at, I'm going to get into terraced housing and start buying up a row of places potentially. But interestingly, they're looking at more complex propositions. So We hear a lot about landlords getting out because there's too much red tape, but they're also, a large amount of them are looking to get involved in more complex propositions. So at the moment, only 8% of landlords invest in houses of multiple occupation or HMOs, but that rises to 17% when thinking about the future. Similarly, 14% of landlords invest in multi-unit blocks currently, and in future this is expected to grow to 26%. So landlords are looking around to see what else is on the market, and they don't seem to be afraid of the extra regulation.
Well, no, because the average one room now, Paul, to rent is not far from 750 to 900, even £1,000 a week in London, and perhaps £1,000 a month in some of the outer skirts. So if you have a 4 or 5 bedroom house and you had 4 people that are living in there, you in some ways it's gone backwards, and it needed to go backwards before it goes forward again. And that's because the cost of borrowing, the cost of living, the cost of buying a new property, all of those things have meant that first time buyers or people that are looking to rent will rather rent and share a facility, have a room and a communal area, than to have a 1 bedroom property all for themselves, and then find that all they're doing is living to pay the rent and not, having a life of any sort. So that's why the multiple occupancies are now more attractive, because they know that people are prepared to pay a bit more money, and they don't need to have the hassle of having their own property. And to have it their own, they need to be earning a lot more in order to be part of that. So it's just the sign of the times.
Last story this week talks about Rightmove, who we mentioned quite a lot on this programme. Australian property brand REA Group, which is 61% owned by Rupert Murdoch, recently confirmed that it was considering making a bid for Rightmove. But would the takeover, what would it mean for estate agents, which was interesting? Obviously, we now know with the benefit of hindsight that didn't go ahead, and the board of Rightmove rejected their takeover bid. But interesting to look at the facts behind it and just put it into some context. UK estate agents currently spend an average of £232.68p for listing on Rightmove, while the Australian counterparts spend between £750 and £1,500 per listing via realestate.com.au, owned by REA Group. The disparity in costs underscores a stark difference in operational models between the two countries' main portals. Last week, REA Group announced its interest in a potential 4.4 billion takeover of Rightmove, signalling a possible major shake-up of the UK's property market. The move would have brought significant changes for estate agents, both in terms of costs and operations. So it's an interesting situation. We've got us paying £232 for a Rightmove listing, but in Australia they pay anything up to £1,500 for the same thing, Joe. And furthermore, all agents pay the same price.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sore point to a large extent, really. Rightmove. First of all, let's start with the agency itself. The agency in the UK struggles to get a 1% fee from most people, let alone a higher percentage. More often, people like Strike and Purple Brick and all those people that came and were disruptors in the market disrupted it to such a point that basically it made the seller want to only pay you a fraction of your fee. And there's loads of companies online that will do it for nothing. In fact, they'll actually probably pay you to come on, allow them to come and sell your house. That's how ridiculous it's got. So, in Australia and other parts of the world, fees are much higher. So for us to pay 200 and whatever it was, £13 per property listing is already a colossal amount for Rightmove. Rightmove's costs are anything between £2,500 to £3,000 a month per office. And that's, so if you have a chain of 20 offices or 10 offices, you're multiplying that by 10 or 20 each month. Whereas in Australia, they are paying 700, but their fees that they're earning are also much higher. I suppose what they saw here was that they could probably come and up the game from 200 to maybe £500 per property. And it's all about making money for Rightmove as a company. we also know that even though 4.4 billion was offered, Rightmove was really vying for a figure around 5.7 billion pounds and perhaps higher. But what it has done for Rightmove is that whilst there's been talks about this, the stock market has increased the value in the shares of Rightmove. So it's made money anyway, whether it was going to sell or not. Agents struggle with the amount of cost that there is. And when you imagine an office, Paul, before you put the key through the front door, you have already committed to a chunk of money that is paid. One of them is Rightmove, and that might be at, say, £3,000 a month. You've got your rent, which is probably another couple of £1,000s a month, and you've got staff, lighting, etc., etc. So you've got to bring in a certain amount of money before you do it. And because the model is based on no sale, no fee, and most people don't want to pay the fee or they decide to change their mind, agents could spend the next 6 months, on a pipeline that may or may not go through. So they got to feed the meter for at least 6 months at those levels, which is quite a lot of money to find. And that is now resulting in a lot of agents perhaps saying, well, you know what, maybe it's time to throw the towel in because it just isn't financially viable for this to continue. And the portal world, like Rightmove, like Zoopla, and On the Market, obviously dominate the market. And so therefore they dominate the prices and guide it. Though I have to say that Zoopla and On the Market have been a bit more reasonable, but their interest, the flow through those is not as strong as it is through Rightmove. Rightmove was the pioneer of the portal market, and it stayed in the front and has continued to stay in the front. So there's a lot of things that they've got to take into consideration. It's the easiest thing to say is, oh, well, we'll charge them a bit more, but we don't earn that much more. And I think that's where the problem's going to be.
Yeah, Rightmove rebuffed RIA Group's offers 4 times in the past few months, and the takeover offer got as high as £6.2 billion. And when they rebuffed it for the 4th time, the shares fell 8%. But having said that, as you said beforehand, of course, they'd risen significantly before they then fell when the offer was off. Obviously, Rightmove say that they've got the team on board and they've got the expertise and a good business, and they think it's worth more than 6.2 billion. That's their prerogative, of course. But what one former executive of RIA said was that he thought that what they could bring in was greater data sharing with agents to give them a real understanding of what's going on than what's currently there at the moment. They see that in the RIA model, there's more that they can provide to agents to give them better data around purchasers' behaviour, etc., 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 and even things like vendor-paid advertising to pay for potential increases in portal fees, direct consumer relationships, and enhanced data utilization to predict consumer behavior and optimize marketing efforts. So that's what they were saying was the added value. But clearly that would have relied then on surely agents having to charge more than 1%, which seems and has seemed over years an impossible stone to move.
Most of it is the agent's fault themselves. It's not impossible stone to move at all, Paul. It's just that the agents find it easier to drop their fees than to increase their fees. They don't sell their worth. And I suppose the true worth is within that side of it. But I don't think it's actually the customer. The customer is always happy to take a reduction. When agents go into a property, and I've seen it year on year on year and time again, just to win that instruction, they'll drop their fee against somebody else. And I'm not saying it should be a cartel, but it should be some sort of professional courtesy that, that is the fee. That's the margin where it is. Some people pay more, some people will agree to pay the current base. But to continue to drop it means that they are actually only shooting themselves in the foot. So that's the agent's fault. It's nobody else's fault.
It's a brave move by RIA to offer 6.2 billion at the end there, because if we look at another report this week which says that a significant number of UK estate agents declaring insolvency, according to new data, has risen. According to the new figures from the Insolvency Service, 286 estate agency firms in the UK went out of business in the 12 months to July of this year, which is a 32% increase on the 216 from the previous year. So more agents going to the wall because they can't manage the cash flow, because the time it takes to sell a property gets longer and longer and longer, and there's more and more fall throughs. And yet on the other side, you've got RIA reckoning that they could put fees up to 750 when agents can't make money at 232. So it was a bold move by them.
Well, like I said, they made a bold move for a number of reasons, and one of them is perhaps to increase the fees. But more than anything else, is to get the share of the market that Rightmove have enjoyed a lot. They could actually win more business by doing a reverse of that. Instead of having the 200 odd pound per listing, if they halved that, they'll probably get more agents that will join. The ones that couldn't afford to join will probably join. So there is some method behind that madness. But the reality is that it has become a three-horse race to a large extent, which is on the market, Zoopla and Rightmove, and they're all owned, apart from Rightmove, of course, the others are all owned by, outside companies that have invested. CoStar invested in on the market. Zoopla is an investment from elsewhere. And so, of course, somebody just wants to tap into Rightmove, which has not been for sale at all. They've been doing it well for themselves, but at the end of the day, everything sells at a price. I mean, it might be 6.6 that they rejected, but 7 billion might buy the deal. So, it's not over yet, as they say, but I'm sure the story is not going to finish.
I would suppose RIA might look at it from the other point of view and say, well, there's always going to be a certain volume of sales because, as we've always known, people need to move. People have to move with jobs and life and so on. So there's always going to be a demand for property portal services. And I suppose the less agents there are to provide that service and that portal for local people, the more bookings there will be, or more houses there will be to sale on each particular agent. So therefore they'll get a greater share of the pie, and therefore in the long run they'll be able to pay more fees for it.
Well, it's no different to the subject we discuss week in, week out, which is the supply and demand of property. And it's the same subject, that there's a supply and demand of what people are going to use the portal for, and the amount of people that are going to have to use it and the ones that can't use it. There are companies that are now setting up as groups where individuals are being part of that franchise operation. Something I talked about years and years ago is now reality out there. People are part of those. People like Keller Williams, for example, have lots of independent agents that now work for them under that brand, that banner. And that's how they'll probably get round to it, because ultimately, it's impossible to do it all by yourself.
Well, there's always a demand for property discussion, and that's why we're here to supply that demand. So we'll see you again for another Property Matters very soon.